morning, everybody. Welcome back for another Bible Coffee. I'm Travis. As always, it's wonderful to have you back. And today we are looking into what happens next after that last crazy scene that we had last time with what happened to Dinah and the way the brothers reacted and everything. So here's the next scene. So let's dive right in, chapter 35 of Genesis. Please remember that I'll be reading from the column on the right, the JPS Tanakh translation. The column on the left is the NRSV translation. You are invited to follow along on either side or in your Bibles at home, or just listen as we read. God said to Jacob, "Arise, go up to Bethel and remain there, and build an altar there to the God who appeared to you when you were fleeing from your brother Esau." So Jacob said to his household and to all who were with him, "Rid yourselves of the alien gods in your midst. Purify yourselves and change your clothes. Come, let us go up to Bethel. And I will build an altar there to the God who answered me when I was in distress, who had been with me wherever I've gone." They gave to Jacob all the alien gods that they had, and the rings that were in their ears, and Jacob buried them under the terebinth that was near Shechem. As they set out, a terror from God fell on the cities round about, so that they did not pursue the sons of Jacob. Thus Jacob came to Luz, that is Bethel, in the land of Canaan, he and all the people who were with him. There he built an altar and named the site El Bethel, for it was there that God had revealed himself to him when he was fleeing from his brother. Deborah, Rebekah's nurse, died and was buried under the oak below Bethel. So it was named Alon Bakuth. God appeared again to Jacob on his arrival from Padan Aram, and he blessed him, and said to him, "You whose name is Jacob, you shall be called Jacob no more, but Israel shall be your name." Thus he named him Israel. And God said to him, "I am El Shaddai. Be fertile and increase. A nation, yea, an assembly of nations, shall descend from you. Kings shall issue from your loins. The land that I assigned to Abraham and Isaac I assign to you, and to your offspring to come will I assign this land." God parted from him at the spot where he had spoken to him, and Jacob set up a pillar at the site where he had spoken to him, a pillar of stone, and he offered a libation on it and poured oil upon it. Jacob gave the site where God had spoken to him the name of Bethel. They set out from Bethel, but when they were still some distance short of Ephrath, Rachel was in childbirth, and she had hard labor. When her labor was at its hardest, the midwife said to her, "Have no fear, for it's another boy for you." But as she breathed her last, for she was dying, she named him Ben-Oni, but his father called him Benjamin. Thus Rachel died. She was buried on the road to Ephrath, now Bethlehem. Over her grave Jacob set up a pillar. It is the pillar at Rachel's grave to this day. Israel journeyed on and pitched his tent beyond Migdal-eder. While Israel stayed in that land, Reuben went and lay with Bilhah, his father's concubine, and Israel found out. Now the sons of Jacob were 12 in number, the sons of Leah, Reuben, Jacob's firstborn, Simon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, Zebulun. The sons of Rachel, Joseph and Benjamin. The sons of Bilhah, Rachel's maid, Dan and Naphtali. And the sons of Zilpah, Leah's maid, Gad and Asher. These are the sons of Jacob who were born to him in Padan Aram. And Jacob came to his father at Mamre, at Kiriath Arba, now Hebron, where Abraham and Isaac had sojourned. Isaac was 180 years old when he breathed his last and died. He was gathered to his kin in ripe old age, and he was buried by his sons, Esau and Jacob. The grass withers, The flower fades, but the word of the Lord lives forever. And this is the word of the Lord. All thanks be to God. Well, there's a lot going on in that passage, isn't it? Just a quick recap. The family has left the area of Shechem because of what happened last time. Jacob just knew they couldn't stay there anymore. We're back at Bethel, where Jacob was before, where he had that famous dream where him and God had made a covenant. And we find that Jacob's name is changed again. Kind of a recap of how it was changed the first time, I guess. Not entirely sure. An interesting point to come back to. But then they continue on their way. Of course, Deborah dies, Rebecca's nurse, kind of leading us into the things that are happening from there. And then as they're on their way down to Hebron, Rachel gives birth to Benjamin. Rachel dies. The family has to carry on. They head on down to Hebron. We find that Reuben went and laid with his father's concubine, and Israel did indeed find out about it. We don't hear his response. It says again who the 12 sons are of Jacob, and Leah, and Rachel, and Bilhah, and Zilpah. And then finally where we end up, Isaac dies in Hebron. He's buried by Jacob and Esau. So, a heavy passage. We got the family fleeing from what they did in Shechem, that awful situation of what happened to Dinah, and then what they did, making the folks there get circumcised, and then murdering them, wiping out the place, plundering it, taking people and things. And Jacob knew that they weren't going to be able to stay there. There was only going to be a whole bunch of drama if they stayed in the area that was going to come back and haunt them. So he knew they just had to go. So they've taken off. They end up at Bethel. Deborah dies. Jacob receives this new experience with God that was a lot like the experience before. And so we might pause and talk about that a little bit here. I've got a question for you all. Is this the second time that Israel's name has been changed? Is it a retelling of the first time? Now, for those of you out there who remember conversations about source theory, this is another example of how there may be some different sources in these ancient texts that include this story in a different way than it was included before. And through tradition, finding different good places in the storyline to put these different tellings. So that's an idea of what happened, but I'd love to hear your thoughts out there. So please chime in the live chat, in the comments, or wherever else. So after Jacob had his name changed to Israel, again, they set out from Bethel, and then more death. And this is actually childbirth and death here happening at the same time. Lord knows childbirth can be very dangerous. A lot of women have died in childbirth. And a lot of women have been very close to death in childbirth. And so that's what happened here. And we know that Rachel had trouble with the birth-giving process from the start. Not so much with Joseph when he was born, but just in the fact that she had so much trouble getting pregnant in the first place. They set out from Bethel, and they were on their way to Ephrath. And if you don't remember, you might find that in the New Testament. When it talks about Jesus being born of Bethlehem, it still refers to the place as Ephrath. So we're talking about Bethlehem there. That's where they were on the way to. Bethlehem is just a little ways outside of Jerusalem. So they were coming down from northern Israel down south, and they were on their way to Bethlehem or Ephrath, and that's where Rachel gave birth, and she herself died. She gave birth to the 12th of the 12 sons of Israel, who's Benjamin, and she breathed her last. So there they buried her on the road. They set up a monument for her, and it's fascinating because here you see it says it's a pillar at Rachel's grave to this day. And so you know whenever this was being compiled and put together, it was all so long after the event actually had taken place, because they themselves are looking back and reflecting on it and saying there's this monument there to say where this had happened. And of course the situation with Reuben sleeping with Bilhah, and that's another complicated situation. We don't know if those two kind of had a thing, or if Reuben
used his influence against her, or whatever the situation was. And I find it a little bit fascinating that it's not even addressed other than just saying it happens. I wonder how Jacob felt about it. I wonder what his reaction was. I wonder what his words were in response to that. I wonder what his feelings were. And he was already going through so much. Nevertheless, they end up down in Hebron, where then they lose Isaac. So lots of death in this chapter. So you could just imagine all the grief that they were experiencing throughout this time. Having just left from that terribly complicated and awful situation up in Shechem, and then just losing one person after the next, ultimately losing Isaac. So you know the family was having a very hard time. It's hard to keep going. It's hard to press on when these kinds of things interrupt us. But nevertheless, they did, and Esau joined together with Jacob to bury their father, and that's another beautiful thing to see in them come back together in the face of death, the face of grief when we really need each other the most. So there's a lot of complicated things that is good for some great discussion in this passage. But if I could encourage anything from reading this, I would encourage you to remember how much pain and complication that the family was in at the time, and what they were feeling from the events that had just taken place, and then all the death. And then Reuben laying with Bilhah. This was a very dark chapter, a very tough situation, but what we find is the family keeps moving. This strikes me in a very personal note. As you may be aware, my brother died recently, and I've been having a lot of these kind of conversations and a lot of these kind of thoughts of now what? What do you do? These things happen, it feels like it'll just stop you in your tracks. What do you do? We find as a strong example in this chapter. And this may be where God is speaking in this chapter, because of course this is another humanly complicated scripture. Of course we see that the 12 tribes have been completed in this chapter, so that's one place where God is speaking or acting and using these complicated situations to bring about a better future. And beyond that, it's just the example that they are setting. When we have these hardships, when we make mistakes or do bad things that cause our own hardships, when we lose people we love, when we're grieving, when we just want to shut down and crawl underneath the rock, we keep moving. We keep pushing forward. We keep living life. We keep going where God calls us to go. Keep doing what God calls us to do. I tend to think that maybe Jacob had an inner voice of God hanging with him, because God has spoken to him very clearly. And here again God says, be fertile and increase. Be fertile and increase. Kings shall issue from your loins. The land that I assigned to Abraham and Isaac I assigned to you. God is laying out and reinforcing Jacob or Israel's future, even in this crazy, crazy time. And so I think that maybe Jacob had that inner monologue going on in his head as they were pressing on, knowing, as people of God, they've got a calling to go somewhere and to be somebody, no matter how tough the situation is at the moment. People of God, please receive this with open minds and open hearts as we wrestle together with all these complicated and crazy scriptures. It's really good to be here with you. By the way, picture, congratulations again for Linda. So not only did she win the last time, where it was about the horse that we saw, she guessed that was in Hebron. The picture that we showed the time before this is this one. This is northern Israel. Linda got it absolutely right, in a way that you can kind of tell as far as the land. There's some more grass and more greenery and stuff up north. There's more desert. It's more dry down south. That's not a perfect explanation for it because, of course, the land has got more variety to it than just that. But that's some clues. We just know generally the Sea of Galilee is up north, so there's more grass, more greenery, just more water up there, and then that really tapers off into a lot of desert. So congratulations, Linda, on getting that. That was absolutely in northern Israel. And today we've got another very special picture for you. This one has a whole lot to do with the passage we just read today and talked about. So that is your clue. And here is your picture for today. What is this? What in the world are we looking at? That's all I'm giving you. People of God, thank you again for joining with me. It's wonderful to see you, wonderful to be with you. May the Lord bless you and keep you and give you peace as God leads us all forward.